Hello and welcome to That Matt 85. I am Matt and today we're going to be talking about gaming monitors. I used to stream MLB the Show and I've been a part of the MLB the Show community. While I'm watching other people on Twitch, I see a lot of questions about using a gaming monitor. What should you look for? Why do you need one? Etc. I figured that looking at MLB the Show specifically, I can make a kind of guide, or at least show you a bit of what you're looking for if you're getting a gaming monitor and why you would want one, what the results will be, and hopefully it can guide you into picking out a gaming monitor that would be good for you. So, check out the rest of the video. If you like what you're seeing, click the like button. If you like this kind of videos, hit subscribe and you'll see the new videos as they're coming out. Check me out on Twitter, thatmatt85, or on Twitch, thatmatt85.
So, there's a lot that goes into gaming monitors, a lot of specs to look at, and it might be confusing what you're looking for, what it all means, because there's a lot of numbers, a lot of concatenations, and they all mean different things. So, you might see online a lot of monitors advertised as gaming monitors, and they usually have higher specs in the areas that you want for gaming, but they don't necessarily have to be gaming monitors that you use. You could use monitors that are just labeled as regular monitors but still meet the specs that we're looking for, especially when it comes to PS4 gaming and MLB the Show. The monitors that are labeled gaming monitors far surpass what is needed for MLB the Show. Another thing to note when looking at gaming monitors is that there are brands that you may be more comfortable with, and that's fine. Or there may be brands that you haven't really heard of before, and that's fine. What you're looking for is the specs of the monitor. If it's meeting those specs, then that's what's really important. When it comes to things like contrast ratio and color, sometimes looking at the monitor and seeing what the picture looks like is important to figuring out what it's going to look like rather than looking at the numbers, but we'll get to that later. An interesting thing to look at, and you may not need to look at it, but it helps to understand, is there's different types of panels in these flat panel monitors, and that kind of changes how it works and what's going to work best for it. So we have TN monitors, which is twisted pneumatic. We have IPS monitors, which is in-plane switching, and we have VA monitors, which are kind of viewing angle monitors. So, TN monitors are popular among gamers because of its fast response time. However, it sacrifices the color and picture. That is not to say that it has bad color and bad pictures, but it's not going to do as well as an IPS monitor. So yes, the IPS monitors have better color, better depth, more crisper picture, but it has a slower response time. And again, with gaming, response time is usually the most important thing. So the VA monitors is kind of an in-between for the TN and the IPS, and what it really specializes in is the viewing angle, as mentioned. You might notice with your monitor, or even with your TVs, that if you're looking off from a side or so, you're not really going to have the same colors as you are from looking straight on. And these monitors are meant to be looked at straight on, and that's why there are some curved monitors, which if that works for you, then go with that, but normally I'd look for a monitor that's just a straight flat panel. So with the viewing angle monitors, again, its response time is colors in between on TN and IPS, but it's made so that if you do look off a little bit to the side, it's going to maintain its color, its brightness, and its contrast a little bit better than the other two types do. So let's look at probably the first thing you see when you look at gaming monitors. It is the refresh rate. It is measured in hertz. Now, some of the different refresh rates you might see is 60 hertz, kind of a baseline. 75 hertz is slightly better standard. 120 hertz, which is double the minimum, is kind of what you're looking for gaming monitors. 144 hertz, which is more popular standard than 120, but kind of accomplishes the same thing. And 240 hertz, which is kind of top end, but doesn't have a huge noticeable difference between 144 hertz. So what is the refresh rate? what does the numbers mean? The refresh rate is the speed that the monitor refreshes the picture on the screen. A higher refresh rate means a smoother picture. This is because the faster that the picture is refreshed, the more frames per second you're going to have. And the more frames you have, the smoother the picture is. Imagine if your frames are really slow, like maybe 2 per second. It's going to be really, really choppy. You're going to even notice that they are just pictures. It's the changing of these pictures at a quick speed that gives the illusion of motion. So the more pictures you got, the more motion it's going to seem. Granted, up to a certain amount. You may, if you're looking online, hear that people's eyes can only see so fast, and if the picture is faster than that, then it really doesn't matter. An example of this is if you're looking at somebody's hubcap, if it's spinning as fast as your eye is seeing, then the hubcap is going to look like it's not moving at all, because every time your eye takes an image to your brain, the position of the hubcap is exactly the same. Even though it's actually moving, you're only seeing it every time it's in the same position, so it looks like it's standing still. And you might have noticed this if you're watching a hubcap of a tire as the car is accelerating. Again, we'll come back to exactly what you're looking for in terms of refresh rate later. For the next topic of our gaming monitors discussion, we want to take a look at response time. It's probably the second biggest specification that you're going to see whenever you're looking at gaming monitors. So, the response time is how long it takes a pixel to change from full black to full white, which is the biggest change that it would ever have to make. So, refresh rate is how fast the monitor can tell a pixel to change, and response time is how fast the pixels can change. Usually a monitor has this balanced out automatically, so there's no ghosting or other problems. Ghosting would occur if, for example, your monitor is refreshing faster than the response time. So it tells a pixel, hey, I need you to be white, and it tries to make itself white. Before it's done, the monitor is going back to it and saying, hey, now I need you to be green. So then it's got to finish trying to make itself white and turn itself green. And even though that's happening really fast, if that's happening too much, what you're going to see with your eyes is a picture that isn't completely there. Ghosting referring to, for example, if you're seeing a car move, it's supposed to move smoothly, but you're seeing an outline of where it was before, and that's because the refresh rate is faster than the response time. The response time is not able to keep up with it. Now, like I said, response time is usually matched up with the refresh rate so that this matches automatically, because otherwise there's not a whole lot of point to having a super fast refresh rate if the response time's not keeping up with it. There might be settings on the monitor that let you move these around too, just to make sure that it's working correctly. Now, reversely, if your response time's faster than your refresh rate by, let's say, by a lot, then it doesn't matter as much, because the pixel is going to change. Then it's going to just keep waiting until it gets another signal that it should change. So it's not like it's in sync where it changes and then it looks for the next instruction, and if nothing's there, it's just going to stay for another set period of time before it looks for more instructions. No, it's just going to sit there until it has more instructions, and then it's going to change again. And that's how it's going to refresh at the same speed that the refresh rate is. So, you might have already noticed me talking about frame rate, or frames per second. This is how many frames your monitor is displaying per second. In terms of measuring frames per second, 60 hertz in refresh rate is equal to 60 frames per second, where each hertz is a frames per second. For PlayStation 4 players, games play at 60 frames per second or 60 hertz. So that's kind of all that's needed, but having a better response time can make sure that the pixels are showing up as soon as possible. As long as the response time allows the pixel to update before the next frame is needed, then it's good enough. If you're doing more of PC gaming, or if that's even a possibility, then you have games that have a possibility of going up higher to 120, 144 hertz, or 144 frames per second. I'm not exactly sure how many games are utilizing 240 hertz, but I would imagine that more games in the future will be. And as far as the new consoles with the Xbox X series and the PlayStation 5, they should be cranking it up to 120 frames per second, I would imagine. So if you don't want to have to replace your gaming monitor soon, you're probably going to want to look at 120 Hz. And chances are that's what you're going to find on most gaming monitors. 60 Hz is kind of at the low end, and even with regular monitors is kind of like the basic barest amount that a monitor is going to show for any purpose, because 60 frames per second is fast enough for an eye to really see a motion as motion. But let me tell you, if you've seen games being played at 144 Hz, you can really tell the difference, kind of like cinema quality versus TV quality. As far as MLB the Show is concerned, though, it does play at 60 frames per second, so as long as you're meeting that standard, that minimum, you're going to be okay. So since we're talking about the console limits, let's go ahead and talk about them a little more fully. So the PlayStation 4 uses HDMI, and HDMI itself has a limit of 144 Hz at 2080p. That's just kind of full high definition. This means having a monitor that does more doesn't really matter as far as a PS4 goes. Monitors usually have display ports which have higher limits for computers. MLB the Show specifically has a frame rate of 60 frames per second, assuming that it's playing as fast as possible, so it doesn't need to refresh more than 60 Hz. Again, with PS5 and Xbox X coming out, these are probably going to change soon, but as for right now, that is where we're at. Something else to take into consideration that isn't talked about as much is the contrast ratio. This is the difference in the darkest darks and the brightest brights in a monitor. So this is kind of the color range that a monitor has. And in terms of MLB the Show, mostly you're really trying to look for that white dot for the ball, but if you're playing like at night, it's going to show up pretty well anyways. However, if you're playing during the day, if you're on a monitor with a bad contrast ratio, it's going to be hard to pick up that ball. And it's still hard to pick up the ball anyways, but the more color range you have, the better time you're going to have picking out the white ball on the very bright white or blue or yellow background during a sunny day. So, besides that, it just makes it look nicer to have a big color range to work with. Even if it doesn't help with performance, it's more entertaining that way. It looks very nice. When you're looking at the contrast ratio on websites when you're picking out a monitor, do be aware that the companies usually skew their numbers. The way they'll get contrast ratios is different from company to company, just so that they can advertise their monitors as having really high contrast ratios, whether that's true or not. If this is something you care about enough to really look into, what you're going to want to look at is an independent site that measures several monitors. Whatever the scale or the number might be, what's important is how it is compared to the other one, not just whatever number's out there. If you trust the companies, they all have made-up numbers basically. Along with the contrast ratio is HDR, or high dynamic range. High dynamic range is basically just a kind of a plateau to where if you're above that in terms of contrast ratio and amount of colors that is on screen, then your monitor has HDR. And of course it needs to be supported by the games that are being played on it too, which MLB the Show does support HDR, and most new games do also support HDR. I believe you might need to have a PS4 Pro for HDR. Regular PS4s aren't going to do this, which means that they have a limited color ratio. HDR is also different between different TVs and monitors that you're using. I had a TV with HDR, and it wasn't a great TV, and everything just seemed really darker, a little more washed out. At the same time, I have a better TV with HDR, and when I'm using that, it looks so much better, a lot better than just regular games without HDR too. And it's not, I say so much better, you really have to be looking for it to notice it. Certain spots will just be, you're used to seeing all these light colors, but when you have HDR, you notice the little differences between the different light colors that make up kind of a small but important difference when you're playing the game. One more thing to keep in mind when looking for these monitors is the resolution and the size of the monitors. Off the bat, I want to say what looks best and is probably best for playing with is pixels per inch. Having a higher definition screen with more pixels means that you're going to have more pixels per inch. The smaller pixels means it's harder to see them, which means the picture looks smoother. I've heard a lot of times people that just think any 4K screen is going to look the same. What 4K means is that there's 4,000 pixels on the long dimension of the screen. So if a 70-inch screen is 4K and a 40-inch screen is also 4K, they both have the same amount of pixels. But how do you have the same amount of pixels on different sizes? It's because each pixel is larger or smaller. So again, like I said, if the pixels are smaller, it looks a lot smoother, and you're really going to notice the difference. As far as screen size go, it depends on where you're sitting. But it's best to have a computer chair so that you can adjust how far away from the screen you are. If you have a fixed chair or a couch, you need to find a screen that is the right size for you. If a screen is too big, you can't see the whole screen at the same time, and it hurts your eyes. If it's too small, it takes more for your eyes to focus on the screen and understand everything that's happening. In a computer chair, you can adjust till you find the perfect spot, and even as you're playing, you may readjust to find a better spot. I like to use a 2K screen that is as small as I could find. 4K screens are still pretty big in size, but you want to look at the pixels per square inch to find how they compare to each other. Ultra-wide screens are another choice. It's better for PC gaming than consoles. The ratio of regular screens, wide screens, are what's expected from PS4s. If you get an ultra-wide screen, I've never tried playing it or seen anybody try and playing it to see if the PS4 really morphs the picture to fit it or not. But if you do prefer that works for you, then that's completely fine too. It's not the most important thing to look at when it comes to monitors. So, you might be thinking to yourself, I have a big high-def TV. I like what it looks like. I like how it plays. Why do I want to switch? So, this is what the difference is going to be, and I've explained all the individual parts, but what it adds up to overall is more time for you to judge the pitches as they come in and make the throw. And of course, this adjusts to everything else, but the quickest decisions you need to make while playing MLB the Show is tracking the pitch and making the swing. So, on your TV, you might be surprised, and you look this up, but you might be surprised. The refresh rate probably going to be 60 Hertz, and that's okay, but the response time is probably going to be a bit slower. If you play music games or rhythm games like Rock Band or Guitar Hero, you might see that there's an adjustment calibration settings that these games have. That's because of this kind of delay that the TVs have. That applies not just to that game, but to any game you're playing. So when you're playing a more competitive game, again, Rock Band and Guitar Hero kind of be like that, but when you're playing a more competitive game, what that's causing you to do is react a lot more faster. Again, with a rhythm game, it's not just that you have to react faster, it's that you have to react before you think that you're supposed to, before it's showing up on TV, before you're hearing the audio. For a game like MLB The Show, you're just going to have less time to react in general. You're going to see the pitch, you're going to hit the button, and it's going to take that much longer for your player to swing. So, if you have a gaming monitor, essentially, instead of having to swing right when the pitch is out of the pitcher's hand, you can swing, when it's halfway to you. And this is going to have the same, basically, the same timing for making contact on the ball as it would normally. Since you have more time to project where the pitch is going to be once it reaches the strike zone. All this time really, really does make a difference, even if it's just seemingly, a tenth of a second. That tenth of a second really makes a big difference, especially because of the percentage of time that you're gaining based off of how much time you had before using a regular TV. And again, look up this information, because TVs also have refresh times. They also have response times. They also have contrast ratio. And compare that to the gaming monitors that you're looking at. So, what I would recommend for PS4 and MLB the Show, you can find IPS monitors which have better color, that still have 144 hertz refresh rate, and are up to 4K if you want to do 4K, and have 4 millisecond response time. Now, the response time is kind of low, but as long as it's keeping up with the refresh rate, which it should be, then that's good. So many people will suggest that you want to go 1 millisecond or below for the response time. And again, if you're playing great new games on the PC, 240 hertz, you might need that quick response time. But the 4 milliseconds is going to match up to 60 hertz for sure, the 60 frames per second that the game is playing in, and that's not going to be a problem for you. Now, something else you also need to keep an eye on is, and you might have noticed at least a lot of people complaining about the game lagging. Well, that's frames per second. Now, the frames per second, not just your monitor, but it also depends on your console or PC's power. If it can't process 60 frames per second, then it's going to slow down how many signals it's sending to your computer. Your computer's not going to know on its refresh rate where the ball is at the next time it's refreshed. And that's where the PS4 Pro comes along. PS4 Pro has updated hardware so it can process faster, and I'm not guaranteeing that it actually is smoother, but compared to the original PS4 or the PS4 Slim, it's going to be able to do a whole lot more work. Now, along with this comes the HDR. When you're using HDR, it's processing more than if it's not using HDR, because HDR means more colors, more things it needs to process. So if you're seeing some lag, turning off the HDR might help with the lag, might get you up to the full 60 frames per second. And that's just kind of a tip to add on to the end of it. As far as regular screens and regular companies go that you want to buy for, it's really up to you. Again, you're going to want to look at the specs. That's what really matters. And if you need to really look at price above everything else, then you might need to sacrifice, hey, you know, maybe I don't need 240 hertz, maybe I don't need 144 hertz, or maybe not getting an IPS is better. So that all depends on, again, your personal budget, what you're willing to sacrifice. But you might find monitors that cost a lot more but don't have a lot more to them. There's no reason to get them. You should be able to find a decent monitor, one that's going to be mostly maxed out for what you're trying to do at a good size, for around $100 to $200. You can find really fancy monitors that do more than you need to, $300-$400. I like using, I have a couple of Dell monitors that are IPS monitors. Very, very, very good color, and it is fast enough to work with the games, the PS4 games that I'm playing. And if I'm playing PC games, it's going to be a bit slower. I have a different monitor that's a little more souped up for that if that's what I want to do. But again, it depends on what you want to do and how it's going to work for you. But yes, what it all adds up to is playing on a gaming monitor is going to give you a lot more of an edge, and you'll notice it pretty much right off the bat. If you're used to playing on a TV and you switch over to the monitor, you're going to start swinging early on pitches. You'll have to get readjusted to holding your swing back. But by holding your swing back, you have a lot more time to adjust to the pitch. It makes you a lot more accurate instead of having to predict as soon as the ball leaves the hand. You can kind of see, oh, it's dipping, it's an off-speed pitch. Oh, it's coming in fast, better swing really fast. Oh, it's a high pitch, I need to swing high. Oh, it's a ball, don't swing at this at all. And that's really going to hopefully improve your statistics personally. At least it should once you get used to it. Anyways, thanks for listening to this Tech Talk, and keep an eye on my Twitter feed to see what we have coming up next.